Daniel. And thanks to those making time to have a conversation this evening. I appreciate it and look forward to the dialogue. And I really enjoyed my time at Sauder. It was really helpful to me in my career. So any chance I've got to kind of give back and help others out, I'm all for it, because there was lots of that going on, lots of mentorship and support through Sauder when I was there. So nothing but good things to say about the career office, the consulting groups, and the profs and everyone else at Sauder. So what I'm hoping to kind of chat about a little bit tonight is you guys have probably all been exposed to some degree or another, some of the tactical conversations around, the skills, whether it's kind of agile or methodologies, some of the tool sets, and a bunch of those kind of, like I said, tactical tools that are really important. And that's a really good place to start. And I think those are all good conversations to have and things to kind of put in your quiver. But I do think there's also kind of a softer side, which I think that was probably my strength. And maybe that's why I'm more predisposed to wanting to talk about it. But there's some other elements that in my view are just as important, potentially even more important than the hard skills, to first of all being noticed and getting the opportunity consulting, and then really kind of moving forward and growing in a career path. So just wanted to kind of share with you my story, some of the things I felt that were important to me. And again, it's just my point of view. I don't represent Deloitte anymore. I'm not with them. I don't represent Accenture. I was with them, but I'm not anymore. These are just kind of my personal experiences and views, but any chance I've got to share my insight and experience with fellow Sauder folks, I'm more than willing to do that. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to get through tonight. So when I say what matters to consulting firms, it should be like what I think matters to consulting firms and what did matter in my experience, and how I was able to get my foot in the door while leveraging a kind of a less than potentially stellar resume on paper. So I can walk you through that and have a conversation about my experience, and hopefully you guys will find that helpful. So sure. If you want to flick forward, I don't know who's driving. Yeah, so for discussion today, so yeah, objectives, just a perspective on how to leverage your unique experiences and really, your story, because I think each of you will have a really strong and compelling story to tell. But sometimes when we go through the process, everyone goes down a funnel and ends up telling a really similar story. You guys all, and what I mean by that is, you probably have great grades. You're really motivated, and you're going to show a lot of the type A things in there that are important. But I think there's sometimes some other things to emphasize and to make sure that prospective employers are aware of, specifically in consulting. So I just want to make sure that you guys do the best job possible at telling your story and creating some separation and distance between yourselves and some of the other what you might call kind of typical MBA / consulting applicants. And there's no negative connotations there, but it's a competitive field, and so anything you can do to create some space, I think, is helpful. So that's what I'm going to try and get to. And so to achieve that, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience, what I think the firms are looking for, what the hiring process was like at the two firms that when I was a part of them. Again, I've been gone from Deloitte for 2 or 3 months now. I don't imagine much has changed in that time. And then a bit of a roundtable discussion. It looks like I've forgotten the E on roundtable, or maybe someone else deleted it. I don't know. So that's what I'm hoping to get through today in the conversation. So I don't know, before we hop in, any kind of questions, clarifications, things folks want to know before we dive in? And I'm hoping one of you guys can help me be the arbiter monitor of questions, but if not,
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Hi. So I saw that you were at Accenture for a number of years. Similar, it seems the same amount of time that you were at Deloitte. Are you able to? Can we ask you questions about both your Accenture and Deloitte experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you can do it along the way. You can do it now, whatever makes sense for you. But
okay, I'll
happy to talk about both.
I'll say
yeah, absolutely. And if something tweaks with you guys while I'm talking, I'd take no offense to putting your hand up or interrupting, and we can have a conversation. I don't want it to you guys sit through plenty of presentations. You don't have to sit through this, but these are the things I'm going to cover off. And then, whether it's through Daniel or you just put your hand up or speak out, I'm more than happy to just let the conversation go take its natural course. But yeah, happy to talk. Is it Kavani? I'm happy to talk about either of those places of employment for sure, if you got any specific questions. So I guess if you can flick forward. Okay, so my screen's having a little bit of a hard time rendering. I just see the top part of the screen. Do you guys all see that too?
Is there content below sales and marketing and those vector
Yeah.
diagrams?
Yeah, and there was on the other one, like the other slide too. Do you want me to share my screen? I can do that if that's helpful.
Yeah, if that helps. I'm not sure why is it cutting out.
So let me try that. So make sure I don't share my company emails. Can you guys see my screen?
Perfectly.
Okay, so I can't see you anymore, which is the trade-off. See, when you go to share, when you go full share view, it cuts it off for some reason. Did you see that?
Yeah. You can keep it like this, then it's all good.
That works? Okay. All right, guys. Well, we're going to battle these technical challenges here. So I think that's kind of one of the key things we talk a little bit about is being adaptable and being able to deal with strange situations. So my experience, I went back to school. Like I think probably a lot of you guys are doing the executive MBA, and a lot of you are probably maybe not mid-career, but you've already started your careers. It's not as though you came straight out of school. So when I was sort of in my late 20s when I went back to school. So call me a mature, or that's generous. I'd say an old student. I had a kinesiology background, so kind of human kinetics sciences. Certainly not your typical kind of business student. I didn't have really any previous commerce or business education outside of studying to write the GMAT. So I wasn't overly confident walking into the MBA. Like I knew that I was going to have to work harder than a lot of people and get caught up in a lot of places. And to be honest, I don't even think I could tell you what a management consulting firm was or what a management consultant would do when I joined up to the MBA. So just a kind of quick side note here, because I can't see anything other than my screen, if you guys have questions, just let me know. Like I got no feedback right now, which is kind of weird. But anyways, so I joined not really knowing what I was getting into, but knowing that I needed a bit of a career switch. That was kind of my motivation, and that's where I'll pick up the story. So kinesiology grad, like I said, I did a little bit of work in the healthcare space, took a job in sales and marketing, and then I went back to do my MBA. And so the next step being consulting didn't make a ton of sense. So it took me a while to be able to tell my story, but eventually when I got there, the point of this slide is just simply to show this isn't your typical trajectory to career consulting, but along the way, each of these experiences had some sort of some beneficial elements where if you pulled them out and told your story in the right way, it could turn into something compelling. Where if you looked at them cynically, you might say, there's no point. I don't necessarily have the things that a typically successful candidate would have to move forward in consulting. So if I think about my kinesiology experience, there were some hard sciences in there. So I kind of made sure to profile those where I could through any kind of application processes or conversations that I would have. I was fortunate that I produced, strong grades through my undergrad. So that again was helpful. And again, I talked a lot about specifically in my undergrad experience, the involvement that I had in the community and in the school outside of just academics. So I played sports through university. I had a relatively strong kind of volunteer profile as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about those things, the fact that I worked through university. And in fact, one of the things that kind of oddly came out through my university experience on one of my resumes and became a point of conversation with Accenture through that interview process was I used to do forest firefighting in the summers when I was at UVic. And there were some interesting elements that folks pulled out of that I learned afterwards in terms of, being able to work in stressful situations, working with a team, all those kind of things, which they sound trite, but I think they're important. And anytime you can profile those things in a slightly different way than potentially some of the other people in the pile of resumes have, I think that that's a good thing. So I had some work in the healthcare space sort of as a kinesiologist in a variety of settings, but I could profile those as professional environments. I had a relatively, for a sort of young professional, a relatively high degree of responsibility, had to build relationships with clients and management, and I function with a high degree of autonomy. So all those things have kind of direct relevance, I think, in my view, to your ability to be successful in consulting. So the kind of thread I'm getting at here is all of your experiences that you have had, there is going to be pieces of them that are relevant and that help to kind of weave together to kind of knit a strong story for yourself. So I don't need to drain the slide verbatim, but the point is that along the way, even though it may not look like your typical path, there were things that I think were helpful to telling my story. And then when I got to doing my MBA, because I was sort of mid-career or early career, I made sure that, and I went full time. I think a lot of you guys are doing the executive MBA. Daniel, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I was full time in, so I was all in. I did all the things that I could do while I was there to kind of broaden my my story, and I made sure I told that through the application process. So whether it was like I took on a GSS role, I again produced a good GPA. I joined the intramural hockey team. I could barely skate when I started. So I was trying to do a lot of things just to sort of be able to tell a compelling story. And I think that's, I don't want to make this all about me because that's not the point, but you guys each have compelling stories to tell, I'm sure. So while your academic experience and while you're kind of high achieving in terms of grades and coursework is really important, and don't lose that, I think dig a little bit deeper, be creative, and try and tell something, create some distance between yourself and some of the others. So that's kind of the point of this slide, is just to sort of show that no matter what your background looks like do what you can to create the most compelling version of your story that you can. And sometimes when there's kind of templated approaches to resume development or application development, some of those differentiating things can fall away. And I can tell you now, having sat on the other side and going through piles of resumes, there's a lot of applications that come through in the typical intake cycle for the big consulting companies. And I've read through the resumes, and I've had, the rubrics in front of me and had to grade them on, the different attributes, and they all start to blend together. And when you get one where someone has told an interesting and compelling story, it still has to be relevant and professional, but where someone tells an interesting story, those are the ones that pop out. And sometimes that, that's the difference between getting an interview and not. And once you get the interview, it's really all up to you. I think really what we're talking about here is how to be successful in getting your foot in the door. I mean, and ultimately after that, it's going to be up to you as an individual. So I'll pause there. Again, I can't see anyone, so I can't.
We don't have any.
I don't know if there's any questions or anything. No questions or anything.
Well,
I have a question.
It's really comforting that you said, because my situation is similar, so I really love this. I relate a lot.
I have a question.
I'm not, and it would never encourage anyone to lie or fabricate, but be creative and tell a compelling story. And I think through that, trying to answer the question, why me and why consulting, those are interesting things.
So Tye, recently I applied for a BCG program for people with PhDs. And one of the things that you are met with is something called a Pi metrics game. I don't know if you've heard of this, or if it was being done while you were handling the intake of
Sorry, what was it called? I missed that.
Pi metrics, PY metrics.
No, I'm not familiar.
It's a game-based system that says it has no right answers, but they make high performers in firms play this game. They put them in a quadrant, and if you match up with their quadrant, you're more likely to get an interview than not. And I was wondering, do you see, or at least could you see, when you were handling those intakes of people's resumes, was that something that you saw, or at least saw value in? And do you think it's going to spread everywhere? Because from my research, Goldman Sachs is using it, and Boston's using it, and Morgan Stanley's using it. And so it's now starting to spread. And I'm wondering.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that as a tool or as a methodology to comment on it specifically, to be honest. I don't know if you can explain it a bit more to me, but.
Sure. It's a game-based system where you do things that are like video games. So they assess, let's say, how well you tolerate risk and take risk by inflating a balloon with 2 keys on your keyboard. And if you can inflate it to a certain point, you get change. Let's say you get 5 cents. And as you inflate the balloon, you get more money, but then it reaches some threshold and it pops.
Right.
And so that assesses your risk. And then they do things that make you where it tests your multitasking. And then there's other things that test your altruism. And yeah,
testing altruism.
Testing altruism. And one of the things I've learned in negotiation classes is that anything above 0 you should take as money. So it considered me highly altruistic, but they don't tell you where the high performers land in that quadrant.
Right. I see.
Yeah. So it's an interesting way to go about hiring people.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think, as technology advances and more things become more widely available, I mean, that sounds to me like, again, similar to there being lots of tools you can put in your tool belt as an applicant. I would say that sounds to me like a tool the firms could put on their tool belt to kind of assess candidates, but I wouldn't want to give too much autonomy to the machine. I think again, I lean more towards the soft side of things. So while that could generate some interesting data points, I would hope that there's still lots of room for conversation to kind of buttress whatever assessment comes out of that. But that sounds super interesting and compelling. And I mean, I can just talk through. I can't remember if I do this on the other slides. I think I do. And kind of the experience on the kind of firm side that we went through in terms of screening resumes and then the interview process. And it is kind of a 2 or 3 stage process. But along the way, I can see how the information gleaned from a kind of gamified experience like you just described would be helpful. But I think there's still, you need the human element there for sure, I would imagine.
Thank you.
I don't know if that answers anything, but I'm just learning about it in real time.
Any other questions or comments?
I guess I'd just like to follow up on that, because Alan, I also took that Pymetrics test, interestingly, and we could probably discuss, if you want more about it offline. But to Tye, for me, it seems that test is looking for people with common traits, if you want. So is that something that you've been seeing throughout your years in Accenture and Deloitte, that most successful consultants have, common traits that are, that you can actually see across all successful candidates? Is that true? Or
I think so. I mean, it's like you just set me up for my next slide I just switched to. These are kind of so there are definitely attributes. I mean, the things that we're talking about now are kind of the pieces that are in the rubric that we grade on. And I think I've tried to distill it down to the things that stood out to me in successful candidates, because I thought that was a little bit more helpful in the rubric that I used, to be honest. But these are the kind of things that I would look for, and that kind of, it wasn't just me alone, that would help myself and my colleagues determine whether or not we thought someone could be a potential fit for a career in consulting. And again, you can't make this overly scientific. There's a whole bunch of art in it, but and there's also room for subjective interpretation, very obviously, if there's human beings reading applications and resumes written by other human beings. But these are the types of sort of threads or attributes that we would typically look for. So I'll kind of talk through those, and I think if I do that, that might help to answer that question.
Yeah, and also if you, and also if you could just comment on sort of people can still be successful while missing some of these traits, right?
Oh yeah, again, it's not a science, it's an art, but these are the types of things that we would be looking for, if that makes sense. Like it although there's a rubric, it's still a relatively opaque process that relies on interpretation and sort of, to a certain extent, gut feel. But these are the types of things, in my view, that made a strong applicant, and in my experience, and that would typically get people over that first hurdle, and that you'd be looking for through your kind of subsequent conversations.
Sounds good.
But yes, you don't need all of these things. It's not that well defined of a process typically, which is why when we're talking about the Pymetrics thing, I think it can provide an interesting data point, but there's still going to be, at least in my opinion or my experience, room for this other kind of more subjective assessment. Again, I can't see any feedback, so I don't know if people are looking confused or if that's kind of hitting the mark in terms of an answer. But
people are just
kind of hop in. Does that help?
Yeah, there's smiles all over, so don't worry.
Okay, all good. But yeah, I mean, I think those things that you guys are describing in terms of Pymetrics and the kind of structured approach, Yeah, that's always going to be a part of it. And I think that's kind of what I'm talking about here a little bit today, is sometimes you need to break the mold and tell your story. And ultimately, there's going to be humans making the decisions. And these are the types of things that I think the human beings are looking for. So yeah, I mean, the tagline there is essentially saying having a typical background isn't always a benefit to applicants. And all I mean by that is, like I remember Accenture specifically, I was in their Toronto office, and we would print off, I don't even know if they do this anymore, but this was 2012, I guess, so not that long ago. And they would literally print off all of the resumes and applications that came in. We'd be at a long boardroom table with like 15 of us or 10 of us, whatever the number was, and we would just go through an enormous pile of resumes. And I cannot tell you how quickly they blended together. So if everything read the same, it's really hard to delineate if something is a 4 versus a 5 out of 5, or a 3.5 or a 4. And so, and I guess the other thing is, everyone's smart. Like, let's be honest, by the time people are putting these, but you're getting to that stage of having the resume screen, everyone, for the most part, everyone is generating some strong GPA. So those are kind of table stakes. So don't ever get me wrong. It is important to do well and to have a strong GPA and to kind of tell some of those more typical pieces. But I think where you can, getting that edge of telling something a little bit different, why your story is different and why you'd make a good consultant, I think that's kind of the trick and the secret sauce. So standing out and creating that space. So these are the types of things that I would look for when I was reading through kind of someone's story or resume. So strong communicator. Obviously, when you're reading a written application, you can't tell whether or not someone is a strong verbal communicator. You can get a bit of an inference to that based on their kind of past work experience if they've written a good resume. But it is very obvious whether or not someone is a good written communicator. And because management consultants oftentimes are producing written documents and deliverables for clients, this is a super important one, goes without saying. And again, sounds very trite, but like there's no room for spelling mistakes, punctuation errors. Those are the kind of things where, proofread, then proofread a resume again, and then do it a third time and a fourth time. Make sure that you don't have those grammatical errors, because those are just kind of giveaways. And where the margin is so thin between the pile that doesn't get an interview and the pile that does, you can't have those slip ups. But writing in a way that is interesting, having a bit of a narrative where possible in the format that they've given you. So strong communicator, super important. Demonstrated experience of that, and then demonstrating it within the application itself. Those are two things that I always looked for. And again, the correlation and the relation between that strength or that trait and being successful in consulting should be pretty obvious. Because I mean, you're producing written deliverables, you're speaking with clients all the time, oftentimes very senior clients. You need to be able to have that one locked down. So strong communicators, that's kind of front and center. Structured problem solvers. So this isn't always easily assessed in the resume portion. Like, this oftentimes comes out through the interview process, but anytime you can demonstrate your ability to take complex problems that are ambiguous in nature and break them down into a simple structure, super, super helpful. And oftentimes that dovetails with strong communicators. So if you can take something really complex, reduce it down to kind of its simple piece parts, and then communicate out your logical approach while you're doing that, that's kind of your typical recipe for a case study or a case exam or business case. That is hugely helpful through the interview process, but also if you can showcase that skill and your experience on your resume. A little bit more challenging to do, but helpful for sure. And ability to manage and thrive in ambiguous situations. So this again is more probably based on the interview. You can demonstrate that, but if you can show that you've got a past history or a proven ability to function in situations that aren't always well defined, you're more than just a widget maker, where in your past experience, I think that is hugely helpful. Firms care about this, again, I think for probably obvious reasons, but oftentimes we or consultants are brought in because the client is unable to, because of capacity or expertise, address a particular opportunity or solve a particular problem because it's hard. And so they're looking for people who can take those hard problems, those ambiguous situations, and break them down into their piece parts, like structured problem solving part, and then read back to them and play back a proposed solution. The strong communicators, you can start to see how kind of the first three flow together a little bit. A unique perspective. So this one is a little bit pie in the sky, a little bit harder to define, but again, like Deloitte is a little bit different than Accenture. I found at Accenture there was a lot more engineering and kind of commerce undergrads that did MBAs and then got hired straight in. So they had a lot of, and then there were some kind of comp sci folks as well. Through Deloitte anyway, it's a bit of a differentiator there in my experience. They hired folks I found from, at least educationally, much more diverse backgrounds. And you know, I worked as a consultant with folks that had English degrees, some had poli-sci degrees. So that they definitely emphasize that unique perspective piece. And that may be partly because a lot of the folks I was exposed to through my experience at Deloitte were in the public sector versus private. So maybe that was kind of a slightly different skill set. But the reason I put unique perspective down there is you guys have all heard of groupthink and the downfalls of groupthink. Sometimes, well, all the time, you know, it's valuable to have folks that have unique perspectives and experiences, and I think that diversity of experience and perspective can, you know, really help a consulting team that's trying to solve a complex problem. So through your story, your application, trying to merchandise and sell your unique perspective, I think is really important. And self-directed, motivated, again, you got to work with a high degree of autonomy as a consultant. You know, oftentimes, even as a relatively junior practitioner, you're on your own, and you've got to be able to be comfortable with that, to figure out how to kind of get answers and get clarity where needed, but to work otherwise on your own. So showcasing that through your application is super important. And then equally so, it sounds like they're kind of counterintuitive, but although you need the ability to work autonomously, you know, depending on the particular engagement, you may be working with others in stressful environments. So your ability to work with others successfully is also, I think, a strength that is worth trying to showcase through your application process. So those two, I know they seem like a little bit at odds with each other, and hopefully I've done an okay job reconciling them. You need to be able to work without direct oversight or supervision, but you got to be able to work with others at the same time. So being able to showcase those things is important. And then just a clear story around why consulting. So, you know, based on your past experience, your traits, your strengths, why does that position you well for consulting, and being straight in your own mind why that is, particularly when you're asked that kind of question in the interview, is important. But if you can kind of tell the why through your written application, your resume, or when you're networking ahead of time, I think being clear on that is really, really important, and that can help, you know, again, position you to kind of move through the process. So that's a lot of talking for me. I'll stop there for a second. Do folks have questions on
we
this
do have a
slide?
question.
Satyam.
Yeah, thanks, Tye. From what I'm hearing is like you're saying resume. So do people look at like cover letters, or still Deloitte accept cover letters, or is just like resume they ask for? Because in cover letter, you can actually elaborate all of these steps very well, right? Because you can communicate why consulting. So assuming cover letter can do this job better, but do in real life when they scan for application, does cover letter is looked at, or is just resume?
No, a cover letter was definitely part of the Deloitte process for sure. And I'm thinking back to Accenture, it was sort of almost 10 years ago, but I think that was a part as well. It was somewhat formulaic, like they gave you a certain space and you had a certain character count, but there was definitely cover letters. And I think more than focusing just on the resume cover letter application, I think through the entire process, as you were networking with people, which you inevitably will do, I'm sure, these are the types of things to kind of, I think, consider as you're building your story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And the second question was like you said, because all of the people who apply are already high achievers. So like, how important is like, you know, being a Rhodes Scholar? Is it like if somebody's a Rhodes Scholar, you automatically give them an interview, but somebody who is not, like how hard they have to try, assuming they have good GPA, assuming they have like PhDs. So what differentiates, like not everybody can be a Rhodes Scholar. So what differentiates an applicant who doesn't have a very high achieving success on their resume, but they're really motivated, they try a lot of different things, trying to make sure that they fit well for the consulting role? What advice would you give? for like people?
So I mean, I think that's why that's where this isn't necessarily a science, and I think that's where you need to kind of look inwards a little bit and sort of say, if the things on the slide here that we're looking at are you know, what we think consulting firms care about, how can I take my characteristics and my past experience and tell a story that shows that I've got these things that are going to help make me successful as a consultant. So maybe you're not a Rhodes Scholar, but you've worked incredibly hard and overcome adversity to get into the school that you've gotten into and get the grades that you've gotten. Tell that story. Like there isn't a formula, or you know, there's no, it's not that way. But I think it takes a little bit. It's hard to build your own story and be able to tell it concisely, but that's what you've got to do if you want to create that separation that I'm talking about in that gray box on the slide. So my cheat sheet when you're building the story are these sort of elements in the blue bars here. I think if you can somehow show through your past experience why and how you've got these things, I think that's going to help position you kind of as best you can. But if you're a Rhodes Scholar, definitely put that at the top of the list, because that's important.
Work on that side.
Yeah. Does that kind of help to answer the question? Like again, if there was a perfect formula to get an interview or a job management consulting, you wouldn't need to listen to me tonight, because you know it would be leaked on the internet somewhere. You'd find the formula. There is no formula. But these are the things that kind of through my experience sitting on the other side, going through applications, and then after that sitting down and conducting interviews, these are the kind of things that we would look for.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful and motivating to hear that, to be honest. Thank you.
Tye, if I may ask a question, you mentioned that why consulting is
Ahmed, wait a bit. We have two more people before you who raised their hands.
Apologies.
Yeah, Kavani, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. So my question was, Tye, so I'm so excited that you've worked at both Accenture and Deloitte, because those are two companies that I'm targeting, primarily because they have a strong human capital management consulting arm. So my question to you is, I have a pretty strong why, and I would say a unique perspective as to why I want to get into consulting, which is that my passion is human development and helping organizations create more inclusive cultures for marginalized folks and cultures where their employees can thrive, and helping them to improve their systems and their processes to enable that. So that's why I want to do human capital management consulting. However, I know that when you go into consulting, you have to have an open mind to try different things. So how do you juggle, because I'm pretty sure this is what I want to do. I don't really want to do finance or acquisitions or anything. How do you juggle having your unique perspective and your unique why with also saying, okay, I have to also be open-minded to potentially pivot if the company requires me to?
Well, so that's a great question. I think having that unique perspective and clarity around what you want to do and why you think consulting is the right fit is a really good place to start. But then I think, you know, if you're a structured problem solver, you're a strong communicator and you can thrive in ambiguous situations, I think that positions you well to sort of say, hey, look, but I know part of this is getting in where I fit in and getting my foot in the door and then growing and pivoting as and when required. And I think, to me, the why consulting story dovetails in well with that, because I think with any of these large kind of global firms, you can work in any industry, in any geography, doing any kind of functional work. They do it all. So I think acknowledging that you've got the baseline skills and intelligence to help them where help is needed, but that ultimately you're going in ambition anyways is to pivot to kind of work in the human capital side. I think that would be really compelling to me sitting on the other side of the chair, because oftentimes they might, you know, I'm looking at my roster of strong candidates that come through and they're trying to match that up with the vacancies they've got. So now I can't see who's talking right now, so I missed your name up front, but sorry?
Kevani, can you see at all when
Giovanni, no, I'm just looking at my own screen, the slide, but
we don't go to presenter view. You don't see who's talking at all?
No, it's okay.
Oh,
but
no.
So if I would literally see, you know, Giovanni, I would interview Giovanni, she'd score really well, and I'd make a note that she wants her preference to be, you know, a position in human capital, but is open to kind of jumping in where there's an opportunity and kind of making an effort to pivot later on down the line. I think that's nothing but positive. And if there is an opportunity or an opening in human capital, understanding your preference is really helpful. But again, clarity on why you think you're interested in consulting, and then showcasing the strengths and characteristics you've got that are going to predispose you to success, I think is really important. And being flexible and adaptable, I think kind of dovetails in well with this one here, this ability to manage and thrive in ambiguous situations. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having that be a part of your story. So clarity on why you want to be involved and where, but being willing to kind of jump in where support's required because you're so interested in being a part of these firms. No one's gonna, like, I don't think there's anyone that would look down on that. I think that's great. I think
sorry to cut you, Tye. I'm so sorry to jump in, but I know that we have 18 minutes left and some other folks have raised their hands, so I don't want to take too much of their time. My second question was, when you did Accenture, did you do their rotational program, or were you a direct hire into as a consultant?
I was a direct hire, and so my experience, I went through. It might be different now, but I went through Sauder. They had a recruiting cycle where it was like this is almost where my aversion to that Pymetrics thing went, because their first cut was basically solely on GPA. They went through and kind of looked at I can't remember. It was like, a slice of GPA across our full class. I was fortunate enough to be in that slice. I had no idea what management consulting was. I had a couple conversations with a smart interviewer, and I thought, wow, this lady has it together. She seems really impressive. I would love to learn more about consulting, and I just all of a sudden found myself in with a full-time offer once I graduated like that. So that was the process. So I was not part of the rotational program. I just was in school one day and then in Toronto working for Accenture the next.
Fantastic.
Right.
I hope that's accurate too. Thanks.
Next to have Arzu. Am I pronouncing that right? I apologize.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Tye, for the information. So I have several questions. It's kind of the same. So it was interesting that you mentioned your GSS experience, because I have been with GSS for 4 years and thousands of hours of volunteering and etc. And I was a very academic person, and I always wanted to be professor, and through GSS, and then I realized I don't like to be an academic. And I'm like, right now I'm PhD student at Faculty of Medicine. So a lot of folks in GSS, they encourage me to look at consulting if I want to come out of academia. So it's really, the word of business is not very familiar for me. So I should mention that. But, like when we talk about why do you want to choose consulting, the answers such as, like, I like the skill to be able to do problem solving, touch on the different industry, help them to, build like their platform of technology or such and such. Does that seems very generic, or we should come with more specific, like, okay, the future gonna towards for future, we like the future is more towards, we have to include like whatever decision we make in our organization or company whatsoever, it should be like we have to consider the climate change parameters, and we should be more sustainable and etc. And then I want to contribute to that because I'm passionate, for example, for climate actions. It should be that specific, or hey, I'm problem solver, I would like to work in a team, and that's the proof that I've succeeded in the team. Is more than enough for that.
Well, I think those I'll try to answer the question, which I think is sort of how clear does a clear story have to be, which again, I don't think there's an exact science or formula to that. I think those things all above, those aren't why consulting. I think those are why I might be a strong consultant. Like, in other words, if I'm a strong communicator, I'm good at breaking down complex problems, those are why I might be predisposed to success. That's a different question than why do you want to be a consultant? So don't confuse the two, if that makes sense. And I think why you want to be a consultant, I think that there's, again, a little bit of introspection required there and some thinking required there. But Kavani gave a story before around human capital and why she thinks that would be something that she'd be interested in and where she wants to kind of add value. And I think that was a really good example of a why consulting story. And I mean, a typical one that you get, and I mean, I kind of lent on this a little bit when I went through my process, was, you know, I did an MBA because I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, if that made sense. I felt like it was very broad and would allow me to play in a bunch of different places and eventually, you know, gain expertise and kind of grow from there, if that made sense. And I actually felt like consulting was a pretty good and an almost obvious next step. It's sort of like an MBA plus, because it allows you to go continue to play in a bunch of different places, try different things, different industries, different locations, different functions, figure out one that you're passionate about and interested in, and then grow from there. So that was sort of a flavor of my why consulting story. You heard Kavani's flavor of why consulting for her. I think you've just got to figure out your why consulting, if that makes sense. But the things that are listed above there on the slide, that's not a why consulting. That's why you might be successful at consulting. Does that make sense?
Yes, 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 for sure.
I'm just going to flip forward one slide and just quickly cover off this hiring process slide. If you guys can see it, it's kind of, and then there'll still be some room. And if we have to stay a bit after 8, that's fine. If that's okay with you guys.
I'm sure nobody will mind.
No, but is that okay if I just flip it? Because I think this is really important too. Like, you guys are well equipped at Sauder. You're going to have people like, is Mary, you guys still work with Mary Cowan, I'm assuming?
I'm not familiar with the name, but maybe someone else.
She was in the Business and Career Center when I was at Sauder. I thought she still was there, maybe not. But you're going to have support through Sauder in terms of dates, timelines, cutoffs, intakes for all the various firms. Like that's, you don't need my help there. You're going to be more than well supported.
Yeah,
but
Tye, I had one more question. I don't know if you can
Yeah.
just accommodate that before we move to the next slide. Is that okay? Or
Yeah, of course, whatever you want.
yeah, Ahmed, do you want to go?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to ask you, Tye, about, so you mentioned that why consulting is very important, but I don't recall hearing why it's very important. Can you touch a bit on that? Like, why is it so critical?
So why is the why consulting important? Well, I mean, a little bit self-evident, I think, but a lot of people think that they want to get into consulting. But if they can't, if I'm sitting across a table from you in an interview and ask you, why do you want to be a consultant, and you can't tell me, then I think that helps me to make my decision as to whether or not it's the right career choice for you, because it's generally, it's pretty competitive. And I mean, a little bit of clarity or lots of clarity on why it's something that you're interested in and why you're passionate about it, I think is required. I think if you're not clear on why consulting, by extension, I think you're going to get to, you know, as an interviewer, I'm going to think, well, there clearly can't be a passion for this and a real drive to be successful. So everyone lined up behind you, or I'm hoping everyone lined up behind you, is going to have that. So that's why it's important. I think if you can't clearly articulate why you're interested in consulting, it's more like you're just looking for a paycheck, and that's not going to be enough, I don't think, to get you through the stage gates here. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So on top of the skills required to do the actual job, you need to have the drive or the passion for you to do the job, and that's why it's important. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, you need to be able to articulate why you're doing this and why you think you'd be successful. Not just because you've got all the strengths, but because you're really motivated because X. Again, I go back to Kavani, who I really hope I'm saying that name correctly, because I can't see anyone's name written here. But that was a really good example of why she thinks consulting could be the right fit for her. And that's much more helpful than going through and having someone who's smart and articulate, but isn't really sure why they're having a conversation with a consulting firm.
How honest, sorry to follow up, maybe a follow-up question, how honest can you really be here? Because sometimes people want to get into consulting because of great exit opportunities after consulting, right? So is that something that you want to tell your employer, your potential employer, or you want to kind of stay away from that?
No, but I mean, you probably don't want to come out and say that right away, that you're already thinking about your next step. But I think you can say, because of all the, you know, experiences and relationships that you'll be able to build and grow across different industries and sectors, and being able to interface with, you know, really senior client leadership, like that's kind of really what you're excited about, right? Because in making those strong relationships and gaining that relevant experience, it may provide for some exit opportunities. But I'd talk about those first things first: industry experience, ability to do different things, you're skipping right up the food chain. Oftentimes you can be a relatively new consultant, but meeting just with, client VPs and, in week number 2. So like that to me is the part that I would focus on versus the job you're going to get afterwards. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes all sense. Thanks, Tye.
And again, there's no, like, maybe you're going to talk to someone and, you've got sufficient EQ and comfort to share that with him or her in the conversation, and maybe that works. You never know. I would tend to be a little bit more guarded in my motivations, I think, up front.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay, I guess we can move on. We have no raised hands now. So
I just wanted to touch on this stuff, the hiring process quickly, and then we can just kind of open it up. Can you guys still see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, I mean, there's not much to look at in the screen. It's just words, but just want to make sure we're looking at the same thing. So I was just trying to get at and say that the Sauder Career Center is going to have all the kind of firm deadlines, application portals, template. They're going to have all that information. So like, there's nothing I can tell you there that they can't. But what I can emphasize, and this may seem obvious, but it bears repeating if it is obvious, that there's no substitute for meeting people face to face. So I get that this is a COVID-19 era. Face to face isn't always possible. So call that face to face over video chat then, which is kind of the next best thing. If you're like being able to grow your network and meet as many people as you can at these firms before the hiring process is invaluable. I can't tell you how many times in that big stack of resumes that was printed off on the table, there'd be a little star next to it, and it would say, went for coffee with Kevin and Lucy, and seems like she's really got her head together and could be a strong team player or whatever. Like, and what that means is when you're reading through that huge stack of resumes and someone else has met him or her before, the applicant before, and kind of gives a bit of an endorsement, through the course of networking and meeting an actual human being, you're going to get insight that you can never get off of paper. So that can do nothing but help you in terms of the application or kind of the screening process, I'll say. So getting out there, meeting people, being straight on your story first around why consulting, so that you can, articulate in a compelling fashion why you think you'd be a good consultant and why you're passionate about consulting. That's only going to help you, and meet as many people as possible. Grow that network of advocates. So just do that. Work your networks. Work with the BCC at Sauder. Use LinkedIn. Do it in a way that kind of demonstrates some EQ. You don't want to be annoying everyone and sending 10,000 emails. So you've got to find the right balance. But this is another way for you to help, separate yourself from the pack and get one of those handwritten asterisks on your application, literally or figuratively speaking. And the other thing I would say is that firms, and this is the second bullet, firms are always on the lookout for talented people, even though there are recruiting cycles. Like I would remember, just meeting people that I set up with kind of coffee chats for, and coming back and saying, the next time we have a vacancy, we need to bring this person in for another look because they're awesome. And that would happen, and people would get hired. So the only real, and so all companies say this, and they all mean it to a certain extent, but the only real asset that consulting companies have is their people. Like, there's no property, plant, and equipment. There's maybe some IP, but really they've got people. They hire people out at really expensive hourly rates to, big client companies. They need good people. That's the way their business works. So if and when they find good people and identify them through networking, which is something that kind of all consultants are encouraged to do to kind of keep casting the net, that gets funneled back up to kind of senior folks, the decision makers. And if the right people are out there, and they want to lock them up before someone else does. I get that, COVID makes networking more challenging. I get that, maybe some of the consulting companies right now are not in a growth mode, and that's relevant, but they're still always looking out for strong people. So pound the pavement as often, literally or figuratively as often as you can, and don't be shy about it.
How would you estimate our approach to you in emailing? Were we doing it too much, or were we measured in organizing this event?
No, that was all good. It was clear.
That's all good.
Now the process to sign up for Eventbrite was confusing, but that's on Eventbrite, not you. Okay. So applications and resumes. Getting it right. So again, the margin for error is skinny or non-existent. So just make sure you get your applications and resumes, the written word right. If you don't want to stand out in the crowd for having spelling mistakes, and I'm saying that I'm probably going to find spelling mistakes in this deck, but that's just something like that's an easy one. That's table stakes, just like the good grades. So make sure you get that right. And then I think the last thing I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about is the interview process. So you've gone through, you've done your networking, you've gotten your resume application in, you've been selected, you're being called back for you're being called back for an interview. Both consulting firms I worked for did this in a similar way. It was a two-stage process. Everyone that got a call back for an interview got both the case and the behavioral. So everyone did 2 interviews. And oftentimes there could be multiple rounds, but they're all structured this way. A case interview is just what you think it is. You've probably done a whole bunch of business cases by now, but this is the chance to showcase the different traits that we had on that other slide. So being able to clearly and concisely articulate, being able to break down complex problems and to kind of take a structured, logical approach, being able to deal with ambiguity and ask good questions, because oftentimes they don't give you all the information you need in a business case. You guys know all these things, but practice that. This is one thing that through my experience, that like I spent a ton of time on the case interviews once I was convinced I wanted to be a consultant. And
sorry, Tye.
Yeah.
Can I just clarify something? When
Yeah,
you say case interview, does it mean you'll get assigned a case and you have to like show your consulting ability and show like your problem solving skills?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And this should be something, I'm assuming, unless the curriculum's changed. We did a lot of business casing when I was going through Sauder. Do you guys still do that?
Oh yeah.
So I mean, if you're familiar with this, it should. A lot of the cases you could like. A lot of the business schools publish kind of business case prep stuff online for free, so it's not hard to find. But you literally would go. You've done all this before, but like to those who haven't or are not sure, I remember going. My first one at Accenture essentially said, you've just taken over a chain of 4 grocery stores and sales are down 30%. Your supplier has just hiked their prices, and the board is going to replace you if you can't fix profitability in the next quarter. What do you do? There's not enough information there, so you're writing down what you've heard, you're structuring an approach, you're asking questions, you're filling in the blanks, and within your 5 or 10 minute time frame, you're going to get to some kind of solution or kind of logical next steps. The answer is kind of one of the least important things, the mathematical answer, but your ability to kind of structure all that information into a form that makes sense and ask good questions and kind of take the interviewer along on your logical journey, i.e. showing that you can take a structured approach to breaking things down and communicate that effectively. If you go back to that slide with all the traits in there, those are all the things that you need to demonstrate through your business case. So case interview, practice. That's a rote thing. You can build that muscle. But the behavioral one is this was sort of my favorite one. And this is more of a typical old-fashioned fit interview. So the question I always ask myself, and again, I'm reading it off the slide here, so you already know what I'm going to say, but do I want to work with it, or would I want to work with this person in a sort of high stress, pressure-packed engagement for a ruthless client? Is this someone I want to be locked in a room with? So this is where that kind of trait off that slide of being able to work in a team is important, because oftentimes it's you and a small team trying to figure out something that's complex, and you're tired, you're afraid, there's deadlines, yada yada yada. Is this the person I want to be in the foxhole with, right? Like really gutting it out with. So you can't really study for this, but I think this is where demonstrating some EQ through the conversation and being able to tell that story like we spent time talking about earlier in this call is super important. So that's kind of it. Just wanted to talk about those two pieces. I think that kind of consists of around a case and a behavioral. And in the case of Accenture, I think I ended up going through 6 interviews by the time I was done, but it was like case, behavioral, case. And I just kind of I got passed around between partners basically. So I don't know if that meant I was on the cusp and eventually they decided, yeah, sure, we'll give them a shot. But it was always either case or behavioral. So just be ready for those ones once you make it through the door because of your great application. So with that, I'll just kind of open the floor. Maybe we can do kind of, well, however long we need, but maybe kind of shoot for 10 minutes or so. Daniel, does that make sense?
Sure, yeah. Let's see if we have any questions. I see no raised hands, but does anybody want to start?
Okay.
Or you heard everything you wanted to hear from Tye? Well, I can start with one that's of my interest. So as also an older applicant, like I wanted to see, like, the process must be different from what I heard if you're applying fresh from grad school when you're 23, 24, 25, or when you were like in late 30s. So are there differences in intake levels? So what can we expect? Like, is it a senior consultant? Is there a chance for a manager's position, and what does it take actually to get into that level? I heard from some other contacts that you actually need to bring business to the company to actually be considered for a manager.
They generally don't hire straight into manager out of the MBA, because if you're coming through a typical like intake cycle, you'd be coming in as an MBA applicant. You're coming in generally as a senior consultant. Like that's been my experience. You know, there's humans sitting behind all these rules, so maybe there's some exceptional circumstance where they take someone directly into manager. But generally, if you're coming through as an MBA applicant through the intake process, you're going to be going in for senior consultant. But I mean, if you guys are all executive MBAs that are still working, you could very well finish your MBA, and then, you know, through your networking, an opportunity comes up down the line, and now you're already someone in middle management at your current employer with an MBA who's coming in. Maybe then you're coming in as a manager. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Just want to confirm.
I mean, to be honest, I didn't go through the formal intake process with Deloitte. I went through the formal intake process with Accenture from Sauder. I then worked for Accenture for 4 years or something. I left to go to another employer, I was still based out of Toronto at the time. The reason I left to take this job is that they were going to let me work for them, but be based out of Victoria, because I'm born and raised in Victoria. I was trying to figure out how to get back to the West Coast. So I took this job with them, traveled a whole ton. But as soon as I landed this job, we got a house in Victoria, and I started pounding the pavement looking for a job where I wouldn't have to travel. So that's where I while I was working for this other company, I met up with the kind of local senior partner at Deloitte. So when they hired me, I came in as a manager because, you know, I already finished my MBA and worked as a consultant. So I guess that kind of demonstrates the two intake processes there. Like if you're coming through the typical process as an MBA grad, senior consultant, I went in as just a consultant as an MBA grad, but oftentimes it's senior consultant. But if it's something different than that, it's more just based on your experience, your level, and kind of where they see the fit for you. The bringing business piece, to me, that's generally it. I would say more senior manager if they're bringing you in. The metrics switch a little bit. It's more, I would say, management and execution of projects and kind of client deliverables would be a manager. The senior manager is a bit of that and a little bit more business development. And then by the time you get to partner, it's almost all business development and a little bit of rubber stamping on deliverables, or looking at them and saying that you don't like them and making your junior people redo them. But so I don't know if that answers the question, but I think, you know, if you're an MBA grad, you're typically looking at senior consultant.
No, that's good. That's very valuable. Thank you. We have another set of questions from Rezu first, I guess.
Yes. Thanks again for the opportunity. So you talk about networking. So first of all, I've heard that, like, at least I understood from, I didn't read about Deloitte, but about the other big firms, they have very structured process of, you know, they have very structured application processing, whereas a lot of people were saying that, you know, connecting with people in the firm really doesn't help. You just need to submit your application and they review, or they decide either to invite you for an interview or not. So that was a new thing I was hearing from you about networking that would really help to get to at least get invited to interview. So the second piece was that about like especially about COVID. I don't know, like for me, if I would say on networking, who should I network? Because people usually don't. Right now we are COVID. We are not going to social events or whatsoever. So with regard to networking, like with people, I don't know if that, I never tried that. I might try from tonight, but should be something like just contacting during you know, LinkedIn, and hey, let's have a coffee chat, and I would like to hear more about consulting and whatsoever? Is that the typical way of to go?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess in terms of typical, I would say that there is no, like, I haven't experienced COVID as someone trying to network for a consulting job, but my take on how to approach that would be just, you know, people are generally receptive if you reach out to them to tell them why you want to speak to them and what your intentions are and why you're interested in consulting. And I don't think it really changes COVID or non-COVID. It just means rather than meeting for coffee, you're going to hopefully meet for a video chat with someone. Like, I wouldn't read too much into that, but how you kind of go about making those contacts, there is a bit of magic in it, and you got to be fortuitous. But ultimately, I mean, if you put it out there and are really working hard to meet people, odds are you're going to meet people. You got to be lucky to be good. You got to be good to be lucky, if that makes sense. So you've got the Business and Career Center, right, through Sauder. I'm assuming that's still there. They're going to have a network of alumni, people like me. So use those contacts. You use LinkedIn, pay for the premium one, get some direct messages, and work your group. Like, even within your LinkedIn contacts, who are the people that you know really well that they might have connections in consulting? Like, you need to be a little bit resourceful, I think, in that. Like, there's not a formula, but there's only going to be kind of 2 or 3 degrees of separation between people you know and people in the consulting world. So just get out there, use your network, use Sauder, use your colleagues. And I think in terms of, again, like the COVID piece, I think all that means is that you're going to be meeting over Zoom and for a phone call, which isn't ideal, but that's kind of the world we live in, and a chance for you to show that you can be adaptable, and a chance for you to show that you can still be engaging on a telephone. So I mean, look at the upsides a little bit, I would say. And I think also it's a chance for you to show that you're resourceful. I mean, if you're talking to the right people, telling the right story, and they see that you've worked hard to get in front of them, if it's someone who's kind of worth their weight, they're going to understand on the other end of the phone that this is something that you want, and that you're someone who knows you know, how to find the right people to talk to. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I would say don't let COVID stand in your way. And be kind of, you know, you got to be mindful to not to just bombard people randomly with the cold calls, but you know, it's okay to be diligent too. So again, I would say probably not an overly formulaic approach or answer, but if you get out there and work for it, I have no doubt that you'll be able to generate some good conversations. Does that make sense? And you know, it's not like you need to bat 1,000. They don't all have to be amazing conversations that end up in a job offer. But if you talk to 25 people, you know, and your colleague talks to 0, I have the strong suspicion that you, and talking to 25 people and networking hard, purposefully and deliberately, you're going to be in a better position when it comes time looking for a job. So, and then that's the other thing, like, it's not part of the official intake process to network with people. So they might say you just send in your application, but I can tell you from sitting on the other side, if I've met you and I think you're great, you're interesting, you're intelligent, you got a good story to tell, and you're really motivated to be a consultant, and the other application I'm reading, I don't know who they are, I'd much rather be in your shoes. And I think that's would be my takeaway for you from any of this, is just you're trying to create a bit of distance between you and the kind of typical applicant on the piece of paper.
Thank you. Like, I'm not from Sauder, so again, I'm just kind of new to investigate the consulting work.
Okay.
So, like, would that be like something like, I don't know, like what, or like, it seems that Sauder would help me perhaps with, I'm from Faculty of Medicine anyhow. So would Sauder help me with, you know, preparing resume at least, or?
No, this is a good point, and I think it was raised by one of your colleagues earlier in the phone, and I may have missed this, Daniel, a little bit. I was thinking this is more of an executive MBA audience, but it's more a consulting club, which it sounds like has a broader membership.
Yeah, that's true.
But so my fault. I didn't understand that, but either way, I would say if you're interested in consulting and you're someone who goes to UBC, my hope would be that the Business and Career Center at Sauder would be helpful in allowing you to leverage some of the alumni connections. But I don't want to put words in their mouth. That may be a follow-up. Maybe you can, because Daniel, you're at Sauder. maybe that's something you could follow up with Daniel on, but in my experience, the BCC was super helpful in kind of making some of those initial connections and allowing students to mine the alumni network.
Well, that's for sure. You can join us. You can not join us. You can contact us at the club, at the Management Consulting Club. There's also a few other people who have scientific backgrounds and PhDs who have, no business backgrounds, and they're interested in consulting. So just reach out to Alan or me, and we'll be happy to discuss the options.
Sure. Your email is in the website?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have another 3 questions and limited time, so I'm gonna close the questions. So Caleb's gonna be the last one for questions. So we have Satya, Carl, and Caleb, and I'm gonna call it a night then. Okay. So Satya can go ahead.
Sorry, should I go? Daniel, your internet was little. So, okay, hi, Tye. Again.
Sorry, did you hear?
I think I'll just go ahead.
I can hear. Is this
now?
Yeah.
Just saying that we have limited time and.
Yeah, I heard you. It was just like lagging. It's fine. So Tye, like again, it's a question which is not like MBA students related. It's like between your experience in Accenture and Deloitte, how many PhDs did you see getting hired in the firm? Was it like a very low percentage was there? Because all of the firms around the world like say that they want like advanced degree candidate, be JD or like, like MDs and PhDs, but what is the real picture looks like from your experience?
So, I mean, personally, if I was screening resumes as a senior consultant at Accenture, we didn't see a ton of PhDs coming through. We did see some PhDs coming through in Deloitte on the public sector side. So, but a firm is never going to look down on you for having a PhD level education. Like, I mean, this is a really strong thing, but it's not a requirement. But again, if I'm telling my story, that to me is a compelling part of your story about why you might be a strong consultant. So I wouldn't, I don't think it means that you're necessarily guaranteed to be successful, but I certainly don't think that it is anything that you should hide. You should profile that. It shows that you're strong academically. Again, I would focus on all the things that you've done to be in a position to be a PhD. I think you could tell a really strong, compelling story with those things. So there's lots of consultants or people that not the consultant level. There are people within consulting that have PhDs. I know that the kind of lead sustainability partner in Victoria, he was a PhD that I worked with, but I certainly didn't hire him. But so there's lots of people in consulting with PhDs. I think that's a great thing. But again, I think the more important thing is understanding why that would predispose you for success and being able to tell a good, compelling story around that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
Okay, we had Carl, but he seems to be shy to ask a question. Carl, are you still good to go, or skip?
I'm shy, but I'm also not techy tonight. Sorry. Thank you, Dan. And thank you, Tye, for sharing all that tonight. I just have a question. You said originally that you were not necessarily very, not aware, but you didn't know necessarily what consulting meant. And we all have this question actually tonight. I'd just like to know what was your experience and what have been the surprise on the road?
I really saw it when I left. I think I probably already said this. It was like a continuation of the MBA for me. Like, I found it fascinating that I could leave after a year and a half or 2 of schooling at the MBA, and then just jump into support to working in a bunch of really diverse industries, and generally on things that were, they were top of the priority bucket for the clients, which is why they're bringing consultants. So that was just super exciting and cool for me. I love the problem solving aspect. So I just approached all these things as kind of unique and interesting problems that I got to work on with other smart people. Now, I don't want to make it all sound rosy. Like, there's some of these problems that you're solving aren't super interesting, and the clients can be mean and grouchy, and there's deadlines. But the things that I liked about it, so I was with Accenture working on Loblaw's loyalty card program, which is now a program that's widely used all over the place. That was my first project with a huge group out of Accenture. So that was really fun, and it felt like a real life application of some of the things that we did in the MBA. And then I spent 8 months working down at Miller Coors in Milwaukee for Accenture, doing, I can't remember what I was doing down there. I was doing an analytics program for them. So like, I was working at these big brands that I was really familiar with as a consumer at their head offices, dealing with, items of strategic importance. And I felt like, I was new and that I didn't belong. Like I was happy to just be there and learn from them. So that to me was really cool, to be elevated to that and be exposed to those types of conversations and projects. So surprised by that, I guess. And that's the thing I really enjoyed about it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. We have Caleb now. Caleb, do you want to ask a question?
Yep. Yeah, thanks so much, Tye. That was great. As someone who also comes from a healthcare background, it's comforting to know that soft skills are very valuable in the industry. I was just wondering, what did you find challenging about coming from a non-traditional business background into consulting?
To be honest, I found it, the bigger challenge for me was, and I don't know if you're an MBA. Are you an MBA, Caleb?
Yeah.
I found the harder challenge, like being an MBA and being amongst a bunch of other people that had accounting and commerce backgrounds and trying to get up to speed on that stuff academically. I think by the time I got into consulting, I don't think that was material, to be honest, because I think that, that would be one of my takeaways, is if you are a good thinker, a good communicator, and you've now got your grounding in the kind of business fundamentals through your education, like the MBA, I don't think you're disadvantaged at all. And I think that would be hopefully one of the things you take from this, that it doesn't matter your background. If you've got the right skills and competencies, you can be successful as a consultant. And like, I actually felt more anxiety and more pressure when I left as a kind of mature student without a commerce or business background to do an MBA. I found that more challenging because I was like, oh geez, I'm not sure that I belong here. So that's where I worked a lot harder and felt more anxiety. The consulting part, I think if you've gone through the MBA and you've done well enough to be kind of, you're being considered for a position in consulting, you should feel comfortable and confident. And I have no doubt that you guys would all do really well there. So I wouldn't worry about your kind of previous work experience as being anything but beneficial.
Okay, so this brings us to the end. I just want to apologize for one little thing. When we started communicating with you in organizing this event, it started as I was a VP external of our cohort, PMBA 2022, and then I joined forces with Alan and team at Sauder Management Consulting Club. So we expanded these events to go beyond just the executive MBA. So it's now catering to a wider audience of students and interest, and even to some people in Toronto and Ontario. So the confusion about the audience is on my side, so it's nothing that you got wrong. I didn't communicate that well to you. So yeah.
No problem. No, I was happy to do it. It was a great conversation, guys. Thanks for participating. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to chat with you.
No, thank you for sharing your time with us, and we're happy to bring you in again next year when the new leadership comes into the club, and maybe you're gonna have new stories to share.
Cool. Look forward to it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, great, guys. Appreciate your time. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Tye. Thank you so much. It was very interesting. Thank you for generously sharing your experiences and like your professional career. Yeah.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
I hope it was beneficial for you guys, and I'm more than happy to do it, and wish you nothing but all the best in your efforts to pursue a consulting career if that's what you choose.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
No problem.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah.
See you guys.
Okay. So long. Good night.
Bye all.